Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming tonight. I know we have a lot of visitors from DMA, so all welcome to you. I'm a professor here in the department, and many of Rebecca's colleagues I know are coming, and it's really nice to have you tonight. It's an honor to introduce you. You know, architects, if you're lucky, you build 20% of things that you do. We don't design buildings for images. We make images of buildings, and if they don't get built, then those buildings live their life as images. They can't help but do that. But even though that's also what we do, it's almost exclusively at school as students, you don't build your work, you make images of it. I wanted to make a distinction between images and architecture because this series isn't about people who make images that are in themselves outside of the medium that they work in. And architects make images, they make them as a medium to be able to also work within their medium, which is to represent a building project. And the concept of the image has been theorized for a long time, especially in the 20th century. If you take Wittgenstein, for instance, it's an interesting thought. He, of course, was a linguist, and he made a proposition called picture theory of language. And he thought that if a thought was going to be meaningful, it would be able to be conjured in terms of an image. Now, for image makers, whose language is images, that might be something reversed like a language theory of pictures. And when an artist comes and talks about their work, they're inevitably dealing with languages that articulate and extend what's going on in the image. The film theorist Henri Bergson in the 1950s, especially when neorealism was happening, came up with a term called the fact image. The idea that images could contain some semblance of intensity that had plausibility and reality, kind of built into it in a way. And many others have developed concepts around the image. Charles C.S. Peirce, the great American pragmatist, came up with an idea about signs and icons as having three orders. The first order, called firstness, he said was, it's just there in front of you. All it is what you see. A kind of WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get project. Then the second level would be when force acts on that. Let's say you're in a room and you're looking at one of Rebecca's photographs, and all you're looking at is purely a kind of very direct relationship to the image. And then somebody screams. And somebody screams and creates a physical act where it reminds you where you are. And then his third level is the level of mediation. And if you thought about her going to the Antarctic, making a trek with a camera and placing a camera in the field, and you knew that a camera was involved to be able to make the image, you'd be thinking about the mediated nature of that experience, that it's a representation, and all language in many respects gets into the issue of representation. When I look at Rebecca's work, I think embedded in her work is all three orders. I think about it on its own terms as a pure autonomous form of beauty. I think about ice melting, if I'm looking at a picture in the Antarctic and I hear sounds. And I also think about the camera and the apparatus that's involved in making the picture as a disembodied thing. And I think if an image covers all of those territories, that it has mystery and fact and reality, then I think it's definitely something we can learn from, and I think that that's the intensity of Rebeca Méndez's work. So, Rebecca, thank you for coming. Please welcome Rebeca Méndez.
Thank you, Neil. That introduction was beautiful. Thank you. And thank you all for coming. Thank you to the department for inviting me. This lecture series is really great. Thank you, Itoshi, and Carolyn for arranging everything. Thank you. I want to start, I think, that with the idea that my practice is in various media and in various disciplines, and from being a designer, a creative director, an artist, a professor here. And the lecture today is going to be primarily of the art practice. Together with my husband, Alan Ewens, who's here, we have Rebeca Méndez studio. And in the studio we have both the practice of design and art. And so I think that I will start with, and later on I will talk a little bit about a new initiative. I'm starting the Center for Art, Design and Environment here at UCLA. It really is, I would say, completely in a fetus state. It's beginning, but we're very excited about where that is going, and especially the partners that we are finding here within UCLA and the UC system and around. So throughout the presentation, I will be talking about a few autobiographical notes, as these early experiences in my life continue to influence the direction of the work that I do. I was born and raised in Mexico City, where both my parents were chemical engineers by education. Every question that I would ask them, they would come out with the tone of organic chemistry and the tone of inorganic chemistry to explain the basic things. And in a way, what that did is that, even like, again, the most basic thing, but what that did is that it instilled in me a way of seeing the world that it is definitely physical-chemical. An entry to anything, it begins from that point of view. And they also taught me not only to feel that love for the natural world, but most importantly for the nature of matter, for its composition, organization, its behavior, its cycles and systems, and specifically the forces and cross-rhythmic tensions that make natural phenomena emerge. But most importantly, this mindset fostered not only a sense of looking for a self-identity, but it was looking for a sense of self in relation to other animals, including humans, environments, trees, rivers, mountains, plants, but also places. Okay, now here we go. I'm here to show you something. This is a strange system that I have to do with all my videos, mainly because as a video artist, my keynote cannot sustain the weight of the videos. So this dance is going to happen a little bit, so please bear with me. Oh, wait a minute. Hold your horses. That was not supposed to happen. Let me try it. It's not supposed to happen. So this is something that these videos are set to So one of the things, I'll tell you a little bit about the video, but one of the things that, to me, I began to ask the questions of, why do living things and the physical phenomena take the form that they do? What are the essential mechanisms of nature? And with this mindset, I created this series at any given moment. The first work that you just saw is At Any Given Moment, Grass 1, 2009. And it is 60mm film projected at HD video at architectural scale. So one of the things that I am looking for is that to create an atmosphere, a place that in a way reminds one of a place of contemplation that happens when you see something that it is of that kind of phenomenon. This is 22 feet by 9 feet. And this work is the second one, Satellite Phenomenon 1. And the series explores the issues of perception, and specifically what you were talking about, Neil, that mediated technologies, okay, through nature mediated through technology. That at the same time, for me sometimes I remember a project that I did with Greg Lynn about creating space stations. And that my class was to bring, what of nature would we bring when we cannot bring a potted plant or a pet? And so in many ways it's the idea of how is it that one can convey a sense of the way that nature behaves and organizes to be able to bring that. So during this time that I was doing this work, I was commissioned by Tom Main to create a very large public art project in Cincinnati University, and I'll talk about it in a little while. This is Betty Falls, the largest waterfall in Europe. I'm going to try to put a little more volume, but a little while ago it started to rattle. A lot of the sound depends on a really strong subwoofer. Yeah, right. So Tom reminded me of the book on growth and form from 1917 by Scottish embryologist Sir Darcy Thompson, who sought for the unity of life in its relation between form and function. He searched for a unifying design in nature. His thesis was that the purpose of design in living structures obeys engineering principles. Thompson declared simple explanations preferable to complex ones. He dreamt of defining organic forms in mathematical language, where the geometrical construction, for instance, of a honeycomb is proven to be governed by the operation of physical forces or mathematical ones. And of course we know that a lot of these things definitely function that way. So at any given moment, Fall 1 with Volcanic Rock is the way that these videos can be projected is that either you can project only the video projection or as an installation. In this case, the projection is 22 feet by 19 feet, and it has around 2.5 tons of volcanic rock. And the sound was composed by Drew Schnur. This is since the installation at the Pasadena, Williamson Gallery in Pasadena, 2010. And what was interesting about when Tom was talking about growth and form, which I had not read before he mentioned that, I was very curious about a new kind of science by Stephen Wolfram, who takes the legacy of Thomson but into the digital world, unleashing cellular automata, where simple computational, self-reproducing software programs is what he kind of talks about, the repetitive application of simple computational transformations is the true source of complexity in the world. Now, that is something that Casey and you guys, I'm pretty sure, work with that. For me, is the way I'm interested in the idea of knowing that something in nature that I can observe, I can isolate it through just my looking at, and observing precisely, looking at something. So again, the interesting thing to me of this work was the cross-rhythmic tensions between these systems, the simple elements, a blade of grass that modulated by different light and the speed of the wind, so conditions, weather conditions, create visual difference, reveal the patterns that one simple element produces through relationships and complex organization. The large-scale projections with the idea is that they would kind of like how you have a sense that they engulf you, and really my sound is incredibly low. The speakers are not reacting well to the sound. What I do in the installation is that I have a surround, like I have various speakers that are able to have the sound, and then a subwoofer that is very strong, so that you really feel it with your whole body and not just your ears. So again, as you see this kind of patterns, that you have a sense that that you could enter into a kind of modulation with the work. Yeah, and that you, in the presence of the work, that it is at architectural scale, you think of the systems that happen in the body, that you enter into some kind of relation. So this one is the grass tube, but with the burnt wood, single channel beam installation, again, 22 by 19, capturing 60 millimeter and sounding then by Drew. This one, the wood, the location, the site, very soon, like prior, a couple of months prior to the installation, Buckley Canyon in around La Cañada and Altamira burned. So I saw it appropriate to kind of bring some of that material into the installation. And what the material does is that it, with the smell, with the carbon and the lava rock, it absorbs the humidity of the space. So as soon as you enter into this space, is again, your entire body enters into some recognizing the distinction of the space. Composer Karl-Heinz Stockhausen said, "We are all transistors in the literal sense. People always think they are in the world, but they never realize they are in the world." And I love how Sanford Quinter kind of gave an explanation of this. He said that what Stockhausen means is that there are no phenomena in the natural world that do not manifest themselves as vibratory or rhythmic phenomena. Those vibrations attack us, they modulate us, and in the end become us. So when I am in the field, observing, waiting for the moment when the weather alters the moment, sometimes I wait 3 hours, 2 days, 4 days, until the conditions of the weather affect the landscape that I am witnessing. We've slept in the car quite a few times, waiting for that time, and in Iceland in the summer, it's inevitably 4 o'clock in the morning when the fog and the wind start coming in. It's definitely. I cried carrying the cameras up into these mountains. Oh, and I have to correct, I was in the Arctic, not the Antarctic. The Antarctic is coming. I can't work. But everything is in the Arctic. Yeah. So one of the things that inevitably, when we're waiting there, this line, this continuous line, is what then I focus on. And it made me kind of think, and I started to question, like, how is it that even from this moment we have a sense of the curvature of the Earth, and it defines the fact that we are just at the edge into going into an infinite space and beyond. So this is called Nothing Further Happens. It's a 60 millimeter film, again projected at HD video, and this is the sound that was composed by Icelandic composer Ben Frost. So with this work, I began exploring the concept of the feeling of the sublime. And I'll try to summarize some of the thoughts that have captivated me about the sublime. For example, like Immanuel Kant, that said that the sublime was not so much something like a formal quality that, of some natural phenomenon, but more a conception, something that happens in the mind in relation to the experience of limits. And in order to clarify the concept of the feeling of the sublime, German philosopher Schopenhauer listed examples of its transition from the beautiful to the most sublime, where the fullest feeling of the sublime was an experience of the immensity of the universe's extent and duration, and also the pleasure of the observer of knowing that the sense of nothingness in the presence of nature. And while philosopher Jean-François Lyotard argues that the sublime expresses the edges of our conceptual powers and reveals the multiplicity and instability of the postmodern world. So another person that has been very, very important for me is Henri Bergson, the philosopher, French philosopher, that he speaks about the élan vital, concept that he developed, and that he expresses it, he describes it as the explosive internal force that life carries within itself, which he claims animates all being. And sometimes I think that as I go through this work and I bring it back, that some of that sense, that force of life is present in the work. So now I need to exit again. Here. Where's that? Or here. So this is a 15-minute piece, and I'm going to show you just a little bit of it. So, focusing on that horizon line, the next work, Weatherscapes, it focuses on obliterating that horizon line. If, for example, I think that when I see the horizon line with this dichotomy of earth or sea and sky, with this works, I waited very specifically to find that moment where the fog starts negating that line. Perhaps, I guess, philosophically, I was thinking more of the idea of the multiplicity rather than like dichotomy. So here, for example, I'm in the Arctic tundra, where we spend a long time. And the experience of the sensation of being surrounded completely by just this vast kind of fading horizon, that it is kind of like you feel like you surrender to this spatial infinity. And it does explore, this photographic series explores the phenomenon, the numbing phenomenon of light and void, which places us at the edge of amorphous infinites. In this near nothingness, all my senses become acclimated, and I perceive more precisely, and that monochrome. So whether whether it's fog, rain, snow, or clouds, inhabits the otherwise very abstract space between me, that horizon line, and my body. And when you're surrounded with this fog, you experience this physical space much more compact, almost creating an intimate space where otherwise one would feel it's the opposite in a way of the other sense of the sublime. So this series continues because everywhere I go that there is some kind of landscape that enters into that area I'm interested in recording that. Never Happen Again is a series focused on the agency of the apparatus as co-author. So as I talked about, the idea of my using the camera at my Bolex, the 60-year-old Bolex, the reflex Bolex, is so I can, in a way, not have so much control and to arrive at a possibility of a sense of change. So here, and I think I'm going to move to, well, I started filming the most mundane of subjects, and this is just an eucalyptus, so I could have that idea of seeing these chroma, these floods of chroma entering and changing what I was looking at. And in a way also by my kind of turning on and off the camera gives a sense of the idea, a little bit of that rehearsal that we're testing. We're doing that film over and over and over again. And I'll move to the next pieces. I'm just showing some still images from the next ones. So here, through the mechanism of, so this mechanism, chance is introduced into the making of the image, resulting in radiant chroma floods, floods, intensified by the irregular flickering of the frames, set against the subject matter of mundane nature, grass, eucalyptus, the park. My interest in issues of perception expands into the perception of light by the apparatus. And again, this work is called Never Happened Again, and that was because every time that I would see something that nature was acting in some way, by the time I took tripod, I took camera, everything, it was gone. So this was no tripod, specifically to be able to capture those moments, and rightly so it's called Never Happened Again. And these are other works of the same series. And this one is Glaciers number 2, which I'll show you the clip. And this one was shot in Svalbard archipelago, which is around 60 miles from the North Pole. And again, sometimes the way that the camera would react would intensify that kind of sense of the instability of the camera. And I do consider my Bolex as a co-author. Now the question was whether I could actually use my SLR as a co-author in that manner when everything is so controllable in the digital cameras. And this is how that was exhibited at the, it was in the museum in Nevada, the Museum of Art Nevada, in the Hammer, and the Mexico, no, sorry, I'm translating this in Spanish. The Los Angeles Municipal Art Gallery. Interest in eyes. This is a tangent. I'm doing some work in which there's prints as a book in relation to the terminology of eyes. So here, I think that I was looking at the ways in which chance, again, can be introduced to the SLR. And that threshold of when perhaps a camera begins to not work as expected, and the lightning works with the speed, the shutter speed in a beautiful way, creating very interesting still images. And this is just a test. This is testing lightning and seeing how the camera works. These are some of the stills that I think that there's something interesting that needs to happen in the way that light reacts to the sensor. consider the journey as a medium in itself, and I have produced a large body of work based on travels to unfamiliar spaces and extreme places. And again, is the idea of being able to awaken to perceiving more precisely. One of the things that we enjoy doing when we are in these places is to try to figure out the way that we can walk. As we are in these places for a long, long time, then walking becomes very important. A series of works developed from this walking, and we were in Bolivia. Actually, we were supposed to be in Chile, but we walked into Bolivia. And Wednesday, as I'm driving the four-wheel drive into this incredibly beautiful space, I'll show you here, and I'll return to that little place. So we're here in the road, and we kind of moved into, these lagoons were incredible. And so the colors attract me to start walking down, and then I asked Adam for the first time to just go as far as possible, and that I would film him coming back to me. And then suddenly I noticed him that he's walking, he's pale and he's walking like a fumigated spider, and it was not nice for the camera. And then when he arrives, that's a translation, not completely, araña fumigada. Not right. So as soon as he comes in, I said, mi amor, back, 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 go farther and start. And he's sweating and he's blue, and he says, Rebecca, we are in a minefield. So he had passed signs that we were inside of a minefield, but the signs had fallen. So how do we get ourselves out of there? And it was exactly the time when, of course, Pinochet had put a lot of thousands of mines along the Chile borders with Peru and Bolivia in the 70s. And as they tried to take a lot of them out, but we saw in 2012 there was a taxi that was bombed, and it was something that, well, anyway, how did we get out? We just put reverse and just get out. What do you do? I don't want to think twice about that. But then this series was a very interesting thing because the film broke when I filmed them, and these were very few of the frames left. I think I had about maybe, it was like 2 seconds of the footage that came back. And it started with the white and it ended with the white, of course, when it broke. But this kind of set a whole series of works that I call recurrence relation, because every time that I see this film, I'm going to see it with memories of others, of the time that I see it again and again, as if the factor, there is a factor added to it. And I set them specifically in for them to repeat. This was in Moffin Island in Spitsbergen. It was above the 80-degree parallel. And the series began, and it's in this case, I think of the site, I think of what is it that I want to convey with the image. In this case, a woman with a rifle, that is, she's strong, she's going through this space, she's perfectly equipped, she's able to protect herself. And so for me, it's a point to, and a critique of so much of the idea of gender and conquering gender and especially the planting of the flags in the Arctic and the Antarctic. So she's important there. And something that I read, what I really love, that was recent, is a French philosopher, Michel Descartes, argued that the practice of walking is analogous to the speech act, and can also be understood to create a kind of spacing or syntax in relation to how things are encountered. Walking and travel are described as a form of enunciation that carries the possibility of breathing life, introducing a temporal beat or narrative. And of course, the work of Richard Long he's one of my most revered artists. I love him, the ephemerality of his work. And so definitely he's an inspiration on that piece. Was that moving? Oh, good. And so one of the things that I started to do as a work that will only end when I die is, for me, to everywhere I go and I am able to find this kind of situation, I film myself and I link all of those together. So it's going to be a film that, ideally to me gets set in a room. I film like 40 minutes before and about an hour after I walk, so that as these are placed in the room, all of the landscapes are moving and I am traversing them and going around them. With this idea in mind of kind of like the idea of kind of finding that the the space circumnavigating, so I'm circumnavigating the globe, I'm interested in how islands, how we are able and capable of circumnavigating. So this little film I just did when we were in Svalbard. I'm on the sailboat, and I'm doing a stop motion. And it's interesting to me how it begins to reveal, of course, focuses on the edges and its form. The fact that I'm able to almost like, just go around it in such a strange sense of time makes the edges and the contour of the islands much more clear. That was, I think, the first day that we had sun, wasn't it? And I'm pointing at my student, Jamie, who was my colleague up there in the Arctic. Okay, and I'm going to move to the next one because it's just loops. Okay. Artistic fieldwork borrows methods from various disciplines, from sociology to fiction writing, and merges the apparent objectivity of scientific research with a subjective, flexible approach, drawing on multiple methodologies and discourses. Artists engage in exploration, surveying the earth, investigating things in the field, and their projects often take the form of atypical archives, presenting the results of their research in the form of films, photography, installation, animations, drawings, and text. Robert Smithson notes that there are two types of scientists, the one who has a controlled studio experiment, and then the field scientist, who is working in a sense with the uncontrollable aspect. And the conflict arises from the perfect isolation as opposed to the chance disruption. The security that comes from working in the lab is very similar to the security that comes from working in a studio. So there is a parallel there. The studio and the lab become places where you can control your information. But at the same time, the information that you control is not that interesting. The stability of that is constantly challenged by the instability of these extra forces, like, let's say, the weather. So, I would say that most of my work it involves the field work. It is my being in the elements, my being in some kind of expedition with a specific research to accomplish and images to capture. A lot of the times, half of it perhaps is planned, and the other half is what you find as you're there. So I've chosen this expedition, which is as an example of how I carry the field work. In 2010, I traveled to Longyearbyen, the largest city on Spitsbergen Island in the international territory of Svalbard, an archipelago in the high Arctic, to join a group of international artists, scientists, architects, and educators in an Arctic expedition. As I go, it's as if I'm forgetting how to speak English. Forgive my accent, it's just getting a little hard. We have already explored several places in that area in relation to a long-term project that we have, I'll talk about. But Svalbard in 2010 was during a sabbatical that I took, and it was this residency that it was above an ice-class sailing vessel, the Norderlicht. And one of the things, there you see my equipment. I took the 16mm, the SLR, and the distance between Tromsø to Longyearbyen is the same as from Mountain Island to the Pole. This was organized by the Arctic Circle, an annual expeditionary residency program. And what was the interesting thing about this was the scientists, the artists, we all needed to kind of immediately connect to each other, to be able to help each other to do the works. Because out there, you need everybody to really be able to accomplish any of the projects. Over there, it was very difficult also to even walk around because, of course, you are at times at -20 degrees Celsius, and there's more polymers than humans. So I really felt in that place that nothing out there wanted me to live. And these walruses come from Siberia. They go there, they hang, but they basically mate in Siberia. They have not yet made it up there in Svalbard. How do you say that? Mate. Well, yeah, big little ones. Offsprings. Si pudiera yo decir esto en español sería tal vez mucho más fácil. Among the several locations that we visited is the research village of Ny-Ålesund, the northernmost functional public settlement on the earth. It's above Siberia. North of Ny-Ålesund, only you have a few trappers, which I'm very interested to try to see the trappers. Time, okay, I'm really, yeah, all right, thank you. So these photographs focus very much on the way in which scientists live while they are doing this project, while they are going in their expeditions. Now, what was interesting about this, and it's a very important point, is that this used to be a coal mine town. It used to be, it's still owned by King's Coal Company. And they had so many accidents in the coal mine that they decided to shift in making it to be a polar research station, the entire thing. And this is something that we need to see much more in the world. How is it that the way in which we have decided to exploit everything in the world doesn't work anymore? It is much more about now how to turn some of these places into research stations. So one interesting thing to me that is how this scientists and artists that we establish migratory patterns, not unlike animals and birds. So even choosing, how does one choose to live in these places where you cannot necessarily leave much behind, is something to kind of learn from this kind of expeditions. So these photographs are taken about, you know, the location, the scientists, and its surroundings around Ny-Ålesund. I have this image already, didn't I? Yeah, so ice again. I like it. So the other place that is that we visited was Barentsburg. This one is a coal mine town, and its production is very, very low. So researching these places, again, is kind of one of those things that we, in the thought that as they are beginning to open it for tourism, is very important to think, how is it that this gets open? How are these places rethought that one does not completely bring all of the ways in which we have damage our ecologies into this project. There's right now only about maybe 250 people that are there. And of course, influences of this kind of work are this Düsseldorf School of Photography, including also the Helsinki School of Photography. So looking at the landscape, looking at ways in which one can identify through the vastness the cultures and the locations in the location we have seen. So what worries me about this place is that definitely the Russians see that the coal mine is not working anymore and that they will open it for tourism, and that is worrisome. Other photographs that I'm interested in, that I have photographed around, are things, issues that have to do with energy, with unmanned weather stations. So this is just one I'm showing you here. This is in right outside Las Vegas, going towards Las Vegas. Everywhere I go, I photograph the beds that I sleep on, because I like the idea, thinking of them not only as a typology of all of these images of where I have been, but what I want to read in the images, but really a topology of a moment that it is very far away from my home. In 2007, a mini submarine carrying a Russian member of parliament descended into the ice-covered sea at the North Pole. Extended at the bottom of the ocean, the sea, extended its robotic arm. This is not going. Just see if this goes. There you go. Extended his robotic arm and planted a Russian flag on the seafloor. Of course, the entire world went crazy, especially the Canada. It's just, it was outrageous. So this is my response to that idea. What would we Mexicans care in the North Pole? But it was something I wanted to be able to kind of make a critique about this colonial, the prevailing colonial attitude that it is very healthy, still well and fine, and so with the conflicts and all of the relation to the geopolitics of the North Pole, I felt that these feudal conquests, this surge was important to make. Needless to say, carrying the flag, trying to put it in various parts in a little dinghy to be able to go from the sailboat to land was something that I had to improvise. And again, it's like this is just the same way that the walking, you know, that recurrence relation was in, you know, the idea of explores issues of identity and gender in relation to territory. Land ownership, nature. There's oscillation of really what to do. There is true confusion, and it really is the identity, confused about all what has been kind of given to us as the culture, the territory, the land, ownership. So yeah, it's not over. In relation to a Mexican identity, I mean, the complexity of Mexican identity, the moment that you are an identity, you definitely are attached to a territory and therefore to its systems, its what they protect, what they do. So here again, it's like I'm confused. Do I bring my identity back? Do I take it? Did I let go of my identity? And I think that the identity, not only like the self-identity, in comparison to identity in relation to others, is to me what's most interesting. And I think a lot of the work that I'm more interested in now is this idea of in relation to others, animals, land, and others, you know, other animals, including human beings. So I'm going to move very fast because I think completely I've over my time. But one of the things that I'm exploring is I have a series called Servation Posts, based completely on this idea of knowing through looking, or thinking through looking and observing. So Servation Posts are based on bird watching. And from that one I created a public art for the Los Angeles, that was commissioned by Los Angeles County Arts Commission for Cooper-Hewitt Library. So the idea to be able to focus your attention and to foster contemplation and daydreaming is the only purpose of this. Of course, this artwork needs to, as a public art, needs to last over 100 years. So I created this Corten Steel sculpture. And this quote is very important for the idea of libraries to me, opposite to what I do. That is the lintel, and this is the sculpture in the making, 9 tons of Corten Steel, and it is my first sculpture. So I think that I wanted something as basic, as simple as possible. So of course, to me, like the most minimalist kind of sculptures that I can, you know, be very influenced by is Donald Judd. The lintel itself is very much looking and remembering the archaeological sites of the Maya that they have always a lintel where they tell a story. So I'm moving very fast here. And this one I brought for you, but I'm going to skip through it very fast. This is the project that Tom Bain did where he brought me in to do the public art inside of the Rec Center. So this is Cincinnati Rec Center at the university. And I'll work with the marche, had to have those where those cones are. That's where the artwork needed to be. That was when both, he was reading Darcy Thompson, I was reading Stephen Wolfram. So this whole idea of trying to figure out something that could work in these structures, the cone structures was where the mural was to be. So he first gave them to me like this. This model came after the project was finished. So I had to imagine a lot of things. The closest that I could see, I'll show you in a little bit. But anyway, the idea that we arrived at after going through a lot of different presentations, it was the grass. I was still working on the grass, and the idea of the grass being modulated by these different kinds of light and space and weather, it became very, very vivid. So I'm going to move. So photos of the grass, one single element. Reed is local. Reed here is considered a pest. Over there, they had not been started to extract everything. So that was a way of being able to clad all of these envelopes that Tom created. And these ones were about this height. So that was a way of my being able to begin to understand what the space would be like, what one would be able to see. So construction, you'll enjoy seeing that. No one would actually commit to install this work as it was thought about, that it was going to be printed on canvas, fire retardant canvas, and just glued to these structures. They were so irregular that there was no one that wanted to do it. The project was about to die, and then I decided to then do it as a mural. So I worked with two artists, two painters, and they interpreted the work for painting a mural. So we had to also arrive at a strategy that we could actually perhaps leave the work undone because it was so many hours, so much work, and so these ended up being the strategy that some places might be just leaving a little bit of the work. And then here, because of the hours, I had to cut the grass. I was very unhappy. So these kind of, for me, kind of lost some of that density, but at the same time, it was the solution. Cut the grass, cut the head. I provided this to Morphosis. Christina Locke was leading this project, and Ted Kane was the one who was rappelling down the cones. So anyway, very, very quick. And then I moved to a project, and I think that this one I'll just run very simply. This is a contemplation of migratory birds captured in Latvia, the westernmost point of Iceland. What interests me about migration is that even greater than the complex weather systems, bird migration is the true unifying natural phenomenon in the world. And so we are very much focused on migration. A lot of projects that are coming up focus on migration, both animals and people, but primarily right now it is following the Arctic Tern. So my idea to abstract this work, to make sure that we're able to then not just see bird migration and look the other way because we see it all the time, but to perhaps for a moment consider it as the code for evolution. The impetus that makes some of these birds migrate is so powerful. It is something that us as human beings seems that we have lost. That determination for evolution. So I think that to me this is a focus on perhaps that code of evolution. So to the next project. And I think that one of the things that I'm working on is this. Adam and I were working on this project, long-term circumsolar, that focuses on the Arctic Tern, that has the longest migration of all living creatures in the world. But it also is very important for us to think of, to focus on this creature, because 90% of the chicks are dying. 2012, the ways in which the waters are warming up around Iceland, this thing about climate change is so real to us as we're doing this project. The waters have warmed up by 1 degree, enough for the mackerel to arrive sooner and eat all the sand eel that is the only food that the chicks can eat. So I was able to film some chicks that simply were piling up the wrong kind of fish, and they were found, you know, in the farm that we were investigating this, they were found dead with a pile of the wrong kind of fish. This is a beautiful poem that is summarized in the next one that Alan wrote. But what is fascinating is the creature that sees the most daylight, and for that it is really worth following. So this long-term project takes us all around from north to south. That is what the Arctic Tern does. And we only know this because only about maybe 10 Arctic terns have been chipped in every group, because they're so tiny, they're small. They're only 4 ounces, that you cannot have a chip that sends signals. But you have to chip them, send them, and catch them back. And so that kind of effort for the scientists, photographers that have been able to capture this, what we want to do is to follow exactly this trajectory. We've done a lot of research in the north, but in the south, we would have to pair with the NSF and to be able to find our way down there. But the idea is for us to document the entire voyage of this Arctic tern and following and seeing what is this extinction, I mean, whether these will go into extinction. We work with a scientist in Iceland, Freydís something, and she is wonderful. She did a lot of this research. And the first example of how they work is this, how this conclusion of the first phase of the nesting season is a 26 video that I did it for and exhibited at Glow. This is what you see on all nights event in Santa Monica. And focuses again in the breeding season, May, June, and July, filmed in Iceland primarily. 5 artists went and we exhibited the work there, and circular screen, 25 feet diameter. I wanted to share in this, for 130,000 people who attended, the idea that this voyage, this migratory voyage, it is able to happen thanks to the currents, the magnetism, the sun, and it's the first. The first part of the Circumsolar project. Next, we're doing a book, which of course with the book we can be much more detailed about all the facts and all the information that we're able to put into to communicate this very, very urgent issue. That was interesting during the installation was that I had always considered the work primarily at night, in the dark. We started at 7, and this idea of this kind of false transparency was so beautiful, because at times you were having the video going and then about 100 pelicans were flying behind it. So it incorporated the image of the video with the real space. So with the Arctic Tern at its core, the work investigates larger themes relevant to our time, such as the social issue of migration, human and animal, the ecological concern of the Anthropocene climate change, and the geopolitics of the Arctic and the Antarctic. And my intention is to create work that emerges from the experience of the physical encounters with the natural forces that govern our planet in order to better understand my place within it. And I think that what we can do, I could end the talk here, Neil. I think that, because showing the film might be a little long, or I could show like a minute or so of the film. That's fine. The work is very much for you to be able to contemplate, spend time with it, and for all of you who want to see it, it is available on my website, so you can look at it there, Rebeca Méndez Studio. The sound was also composed by Ben Frost, very appropriately. So thank you. I think we can definitely. Yes, definitely. So we can. There, I can leave it or stop it. Well, we can leave it. Huh?
I'm gonna lead it off. Sorry, Mike. But I know you won't. So, the talk starts off talking about the sublime and moves toward, I wouldn't say just the political, I would say very much the emotional and the political at the end. If I think of say, Edward Burtynsky and the Oil Project, or Richard Misrach going to shoot post-Katrina, New Orleans, and so forth, or even Gursky going to Pyongyang and shooting, that, bizarre world. The subject matter of sort of atrocity or horror or aftermath, right, is the thing that supplies the sublime. Right, and then the scale of the image and so forth. Your project takes the sublime and rejects that kind of easy capturing, yet it's still a deeply political discourse. But your subject matter is all the things that are problematic in a way that we can't see, in the same way that we can see, the oil field as a sign and a symbol of global hegemony and greed and power and so forth. Can you talk about when you began working in sort of art practice terms along with graphic design? Was it motivated by nature as a political project or a return for you or something? Can you talk about the bigger motivations? Let's say at the beginning.
This is to me is that I feel that it began very much about the understanding much more of perhaps, okay, when I left Mexico, very important was for me to be very actively social and political. And that's something that when I came, I mean, even when I came here, I was with the Communist Manifesto under my arm, and to like free Cuba, free Angola, all those things, to singing. So it was a very difficult thing to come here. I came here, honestly, I was too Mexican to be able to tell my father that I didn't want to come here. That was how I felt. And I felt, of course, it was the idealism of youth. Because it's not that communism works, it's not that many other things work, but the idea of the political voice is a very important voice for me, but I also know that I'm arriving to that political voice and having that political voice, but much more, I refuse to just show the gore. I refuse to show that, which of course we know and we understand it so well. It is what permeates our mind. So for me, it's like, can I actually show the importance of having to act in relation to climate change and in relation to a whole species disappearing, but through inspiration and through, you know, perhaps Alain Badiou would be the person that I would want to have as the philosopher that leads me. It's like it is truly through love. I mean, that's philosophy of having that empathy and having that sense of filling yourself with that which makes you and propels you to respond with all of yourself, perhaps. I don't know if that answered it.
It does, and in terms of messages, representation of a political position, a call for change, you know, at some particular level. Do you think that the work sends those messages,
it's very subtle.
Or not?
No, it's very subtle. I think that it is not a call to action. I don't feel that it is. Like, for example, I have done as a designer political campaigns, you know, anti-drug campaign and anti-rape campaign, and all things that there are. You cannot be subtle. You have to be concise, clear, but you have to be very, very specific. And what's interesting, what's happening to me is that so far the artwork is very, very poetic and subtle in that way. It is more introspective. But it doesn't mean that I'm not cooking and needing to say something. So for example, when I'm reading Naomi Klein's This Changes Everything, I'm boiling, and I'm making the center for art design and an environment, because I know I need more than that. I need more than my work. I cannot move what I need to move with my work at this point. I will. I have a feeling. I do want to enter into and go perhaps more political, but I don't know. It might be that this artwork is what keeps me from shooting myself. Yeah, it really is. I think that for me, it's a place where I find a quiet place to meditate on that which is incredible about the world, and that if I'm able to tell the story of the Arctic Tern is wonderful. But I know that the nerve endings for me, they're very, very present. So when I was doing the peace over violence work and the anti-rape work, there was a point where I couldn't go on. I mean, it really was so penetrating, because I become what I do. And so in this case, I do think that perhaps this work is very good for me, because I become this and have a voice to then say the rest. But it's really kind of perhaps a respite. And I would love the world to be able to find that. When the work was exhibited at the Elise Williamson Gallery, the waterfall and the grass, what was interesting was Steve Nolan said that usually people would come and maybe see the work in general, get 5-10 minutes. That in my work they brought their lunch, they sat in the ground, and they used it. It wasn't just artwork to be seen; they used it. That was beautiful, and in a way, it's like this contemplation that was important for me. I think that it worked. And it was really beautiful to see, like, at the globe. Obviously, the event lends itself for it. You think people are going to sit there, see 20, if they can sit for 26 minutes. You never know. As a video artist, you think, okay, but can I keep them? Can I keep their attention? And I saw, I was observing, and so many people saw it 2, 3, 4 times that they kept looking, kept seeing something in it that stayed with them.
All of the projects have I think in that light, have an incredibly not passive, but not passing judgment, even though you have judgment as a person. And you present the piece in a way, you know, the gestalt effect of it is you know, rather open in a way. Do you think that it could be read as documentary at the same time, or would you say, because documentary and the sort of presumably neutral, you judge after, you know, things are presented? I mean, I don't want to say, you know, it's documentary like you didn't compose the shot or something, or you didn't make, you know, sound. But I feel as though it can oscillate between, you know, in the Persian sense of it's just a beautiful thing in front of me that I won't think about, and then it's a representation of things that, whether I've been to the Arctic, excuse the mistake on Antarctic, or not, we all know it to a certain extent as being a representation when we see melting ice or when we see ice flows. I'm sure we all can't help but think of heat and that relationship to global warming. I mean, I feel there's a documentary quality to it, but, you know, one in which you could shade as being obviously deeply poetic. But I'm just wondering how you think about it.
Claro, you know, I do see myself as a documentarian in many ways. Like, for example, when I go and do field work, I sometimes feel like I'm a surveyor. But I don't believe in objectivity. I don't think that there's ever a possibility as to be objective. It's just you choose a subjectivity that you want to speak from. And the subtlety of, for example, that when I shoot the ocean, the seas are aggressive. The seas could kill you. When I was in Iceland, the only thing that actually I felt that was going to kill me is the weather. So that is even the sun, for example, the sun is this aggressive force that is destroying us. So I'm documenting, I didn't shoot those, that's NASA of course, but I'm documenting with an attitude of the force of nature is powerful. Like, I think I want to be able to convey the force of sensation, the force of nature, and I think that in that sense, to hold a very aggressive, very strong message that speaks of me, but I'm trying almost, it's as if I'm trying to speak for the ocean, or speak for even the celluloid as it flickers, that it is fragile and it is going to break at any point. So through those subtle strategies, I try to show fragility rather than, you know, perhaps yet let's save the world. It's more like this kind of fossilization, the way I shoot. And for me, for example, adding the bird is the first time that I'm adding a creature. And I know I promised some people some walruses, and they're there. It's just that the lecture was going a little bit too long. But shooting animals, observing from the point of view of animals, or considering animals. So far, the way that we have studied animals has been through primarily vivisection, just cutting them apart and studying them. Can we actually study them through just that observation? And I think that for me, like this bird, I'm at the edge, for example, when I'm showing the chicks being fed, and it's tough, because that's to me where it gets most documentary. And it's very unusual for my work. So I myself don't know what to do with that. So I think that I hear a little bit of, so I think, you know, perhaps I will move into documentary, or perhaps not.
I mean, maybe my last comment, and then I'll pass it to Michael. I mean, when I think about let's say like the eucalyptus.
Like these, they're killing themselves. So
Yeah.
those were not, I thought they were mating. Now someone else, that's not killing someone. But I thought that those birds were attacking each other. So it was, and I totally interrupted what you were saying, but it was a way of my being able to say, yes, I can show this, but I'm not yet Attenborough. So or something like that. It was,
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that there are enough instances in the work, let's say, like when you're photographing the eucalyptus trees. I mean, that's a strong structuralist filmmaking reference to Frampton or somebody like that, where you're making an art project and you're not making any pretensions to not doing that, or to issues of flicker and so forth. And I think that's a really great thing that allows you to escape, on the one hand, the idea that the sublime is either the expansive and the awe-inspiring Ansel Adams of the West, or versus claustrophobia and tightness, or the banal. At the same time, it's all a matter of how you put it together. And I think that the fact that you cover that whole spectrum of scale and form, is really fantastic. I mean, you're super prolific, and to be able to do that as well. So let me pass it to Michael, and then anybody else who's got questions, please.
I think what I particularly love about the work you've shown us is the fact that it's all without commentary. It's all nature speaking for itself and allowing you to perhaps impose your own interpretation or view it however you want, whether as a slow motion, very subtle example of climate change, or just the pure physical beauty of it, the quality of the sublime, as you mentioned. I'm curious whether you see any affinity in the work that you've been doing over the past several years with Sebastião Salgado's Genesis project, where, as I'm sure everybody knows, he went from documenting in almost harrowing fashion the appalling working conditions of gold miners in Brazil and other workers, and did 2 major projects on that, to documenting not the destruction of the environment, but rather the 47% or however much it was he calculated that had not been destroyed. That in fact there is still an extraordinary amount of unspoiled natural beauty. In order to find it, he ventured to the ends of the earth, into the depths of Africa and Antarctica and so on, and North America too, and found these and created these images which in a way are almost 19th century in their romantic depiction of nature in its most awe-inspiring form. Very different from what you've been showing. But I'm curious, since obviously you know the work, whether you see any kind of connection at all.
Well, I think that definitely I want to stay away from that because I do want to be able to have that stance that what we have, it is being destroyed. And at the same time, I'm trying to find that specific way that still is a gesture. It is something that speaks of the natural world, but also in a way perhaps, because this is the interesting thing, when people are doing a lot of this field work and that they come up with their findings of the field work, the expected way to show it is incredibly objective. Like I'm thinking of a certain artist like Karen Simon, that whatever her projects are, they're so distant and objective that it is very much the way that perhaps a scientist or a literary person would organize the information. So finding that place where I'm still speaking of the positive of things, but for me, the idea that I follow the Arctic Tern, that it is a project that I'm going through all of this while trying to understand how migration happens, when I get to Antarctica, it's going to be so difficult because it's going to be gorgeous and glorious, and there are going to be these little creatures molting their feathers. And, you know, so one way is, of course, to show the walruses that I have. They're like being snowed on, and, you know, you think they're going to be blown by the wind. I was being blown by the wind. My tripod was this low, and you still see it. So there's something about being there and seeing them, but they're in their habitat. But it is very different than, for example, when they are in the summer, where they are, you know, completely in this perfect days. When I would go to Iceland, the perfect days bothered me because it turned them into those perfect shots. So it was, I do kind of worry about that moment where the work becomes a little bit too romantic, and then we stop understanding what's happening.
You shy from aestheticizing.
I really try, very much so, to shy from that. And so perhaps that's also why, and I'm trying to figure out how to speak to this thing as I talk to you. to do this. But it's a conflict, constant conflict. I want to be at that liminal space where it is neither the photographing the trash piles or something like that, but it's not just the beautiful nature. It is the complexity of both, and that is the constant kind of interweaving.
Questions?
Hey, Rebecca. Just surveying the work you've shown today, so I'm thinking of the kind of earlier work where you showed the series with the grass and the waterfall, and then fast forward to the bird migration that you rotated, the image that you rotated, and then fast forward still to the kind of projection prism on the beach where you layered the images, right? And I'm thinking in terms of how you kind of eventually spatialize these images. So in the kind of first case, there's this high degree of fidelity to the image. And then slowly it's, you know, you've taken a liberty with sort of departing from that actual depiction of the actual image to the last case where the spatial sort of projection of the image is overlaid with the real and therefore kind of infinitely impacted by it. And I'm just wondering how you regard that aspect, the kind of spatialization, the way you deploy the work, and how is that a kind of hierarchical evolution, and are we just seeing it that way, or yeah?
Yeah, I like controlling the installation as much as I can. Glow was highly problematic for many reasons. Like even, for example, I see that truss and my hair goes up like a Doberman, and it's just, I don't like it. Yeah, there's something that is not refined and everything. I quoted a truss that I would have made, and it was something that it was maybe 10 times the budget that it was given to me. So there were compromises to me in that installation. At the same time, when the opportunity arose, all I wanted to have is that I want to have this planet floating with the ocean behind it. So that was what drove what we ended up doing, and I think that if, let's say, that this gets, the Ex Teresa, the museum in Mexico, they want to exhibit this work. And of course, what I would love to do is to be able to have it in a way that I don't have this such heavy structure around it. Can it be much more ethereal? I would love it if it would be almost disappearing. So no, I think that to me was So I think that even I've tried it. This one also went to Amsterdam in Trouw, the space, and still it wasn't resolved either. It was actually finer circle, the structure, but still it was not working. So I haven't resolved for that work what it needs to be, because yeah, the only place, this is interesting, it was exhibited in Philadelphia. It was 100 feet long screen wall, 4 projectors, and it ended up being 4 circles on black. And that was something that I felt when I was there, that it would be a bit of a compromise. But what was really beautiful was to be able to see them happening at different times. So you also, according to what was on those circles, on the film, you created different stories. So it opened it up to different kind of relations. But yeah, it's important that it is installed in a way that I'm able to really surround you, and that aesthetically it breaks the architecture.
Is there a question? I just wanted to ask, what do you think the difference is between framing something by a rectangle and framing something by a circle? I thought that there was a real sensibility in the beach installation that maybe wouldn't exist with a rectangle.
I know that I avoid, whenever the work is to be exhibited only as a rectangle, I don't exhibit the work. Either it utilizes the entire space edge to edge, so it breaks the space and it really becomes a window, or I can control specifically the structure and the form that it is exhibited in. So yes, I hate the rectangle. There's no way that I do not think of PowerPoint presentations. So I think that's just, I refuse. So I think that when the rectangle is, for example, within a screen and a series of screens, the way that, for example, Diana Thayer exhibits her work, there's something about it almost becomes a series of frames, that is a completely different language, that even though they're contained, the multiplicity works. The way that Bill Viola exhibits sometimes his work, that they are rectangles, but he's also controlling very much the space. So I think that it is you do want to control what the form of it is. At least I want.
I want to thank you very, very much, Rebecca, and also Adam as well. Adam's deeply involved in all the work, and you both should be congratulated. But thank you so much. That was really great, and I think it's giving us a lot to think about.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for coming.